So my card for today says that my goal is to be the truest and most authentic version of myself in each setting I operate in. And this particular card resonates with me because that's really what it means to be multifaceted. It's showing up kind of with that authenticity wherever you are functioning. But I think something that is important to think about when we think about this idea of functioning and existing in these different spaces and the idea of authenticity, it's what does that balance look like? So knowing that you are being asked to kind of pivot and almost shapeshift from place to place, how are you kind of maintaining that balance internally? And that's something I don't want to say struggled with, but is absolutely an active practice for me, is to kind of take a step back and understand that balance. I talk about the idea of it being like almost a juggling act. So if you think about a juggler, multiple things, multiple objects, kind of keeping them all in the air. And oftentimes that's what life feels like. It's a juggling act where we're trying to keep the balls in the air, whether it's professional, kids, and that's both the care of the child as well as the kind of the grooming and the making sure that you're raising good human beings and functioning members of society. There's a lot more that goes into that than just keeping a child alive and fed, a roof over their head. There's things like the finances. I mean, that's a big thing to keep track of in terms of this balancing act. From a professional perspective, this idea of career growth and progression, like, are you going to work just to work, or are you trying to work towards something in particular? That can be a job in and of itself. So there's lots of things that need to be juggled. There's lots of things that need to be kind of kept in the air. But the reality is that sometimes that's not feasible. So while you are kind of doing this activity, this juggling activity, there may be times when some of the balls fall, and that's okay. I think for me, it took a little while to come to that understanding that it is okay. There's this reflection activity that happens where it's like, are all the balls the same level of importance? And I think that's a very important question to ask yourself when you're going through this process in life of trying to manage and maintain all of these things. Do they all hold the same value? Do they all have the same level of impact? And I kind of referenced the idea of it being, some of them are glass balls. So some of those things are things that you get one shot. You don't want to mess it up. If you drop that ball, it's going to shatter and there's really no coming back from that. There's some things that you may be able to kind of drop. It may be a wiffle ball where it hits the ground, bounces, rolls to the side. Not ideal, but you know that you can pick it up when you're ready. There may be some bouncy balls where, you know, it's actually fine that it hits the ground. It's going to do its own thing. And when you're ready to pick it back up, that's fine. So I think that looking at life in that way helps to kind of give yourself grace. So yes, in theory, the ideal is to have this seamless juggling act happening where all the balls stay in the air at all times and you're maintaining all of the things at all times. But the reality is just knowing which balls are more important, which balls you need to pay more attention to, which balls are glass, can't be dropped, which balls are okay to kind of let roll to the side, and just giving yourself grace around that. So there's this tool that we use in coaching called the Wheel of Personal Perspective. And it is another visual aid that helps to kind of exemplify the very topic that I was just talking about in terms of that kind of balancing act, that juggling effort. So the way the wheel works is it is designed for you to kind of use it as a visual tool to quickly understand how balanced or fulfilled your life is. So you have these different pieces of the wheel. So think of it as like a pie chart. There's different areas, different categories. And and you select the categories that are important to your life. So there are some that are usually pre-populated, but if you were to do this activity on your own, you can kind of choose your own adventure and pick the things that are most important to you. But the thought process is that the wheel and the different pieces of the wheel represent different categories in your life. And it allows you to see what kind of that life balance is for you. So when completing it, the thought process is to kind of do that rundown of the different areas and rate them. So basically on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 or 0 to 10, 0 being completely unsatisfactory, you're miserable in this area, 10 being thoroughly satisfied, it actually couldn't get better. You kind of want to decide where you perceive yourself in that category in your life at the present time, and then kind of jot that number down. And the thought process is you go around the wheel, you write those numbers in. I do it by shading. So kind of draw the lines and have 0 through 10 kind of marked out. And then you can visually see which areas are full, which areas are empty, which areas are struggling. And that gives you kind of just an assessment. And I think that it's important to do that assessment. I talk about like self-reflection and the importance of taking a step back, looking at your life and kind of assessing for yourself how things are going, those temperature checks to just help you kind of gauge where you are. And it's not from a criticism perspective. It's more from a acknowledgement, just understanding like, this is where I am right now. I've gotten very deliberate about that activity because I used to be very hard on myself. I am my biggest critic. And I oftentimes would beat myself up for not giving quote unquote 100%. But these kind of self-reflection breaks and these self-assessment activities I would do with myself would help me to understand that sometimes 100% is not what you would think it shows up as. So if I only have 40% to give today because physically that's all I have to give. If I'm giving 40%, then technically I'm giving 100% of my capacity for that day. And I think that realizations like that really do help along this journey of giving yourself grace. So when we have these tools that allow us to do this self-check-in, it's exactly that exercise of giving yourself grace based on kind of where you are. It also helps you to be very deliberate about next steps and kind of where you want to put your effort and energy. So if I know that I've taken a step back and I've done this activity and kind of filled out this wheel of personal perspective and I see my categories. So for me, the categories that I usually populate are financial, wellness, spiritual, emotional, relationships and professional. And those have been kind of selected for different reasons, but those are the areas that matter to me the most. Some of them can be broken up into subcategories, especially like relationships, relationship with my son versus relationship with other family members or friends or a significant other. So there's definitely room for tailoring this so that it reflects the reality of your life. But those are the categories I tend to go with. And when I do this activity, it allows me to take a beat and really just understand where things are. So coming out of it, when I've filled out 0 to 10, I can look and kind of get a feel for the wellness of what it is that my life is looking like at the time. So there are times when some of these buckets are really low. So emotional might be struggling for whatever reason. Maybe it's the wellness. So that I consider like fitness. What am I putting into my body? What am I eating? Am I moving my body? So that has definitely been an area that has struggled in the past. But again, doing this activity really gives you an opportunity to just kind of take the judgment out of it and just kind of lay it all out and then come up with a plan of action. So if there are areas that are super low, that may be your choice to focus on. Maybe it's a reflection at the beginning of the month. I'm writing down kind of my wins for last month, my goals for next month. If I do this activity and see that last month, I was on top of my budget, I was doing well in terms of my relationships, doing well in terms of professional, spiritual and emotional, but that wellness was really, really struggling, then maybe that becomes your goal. It also is an opportunity if you're seeing that several areas are struggling. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more of a deliberate and kind of thoughtful activity around why am I struggling in so many areas. But I just like to promote the idea of this activity. So whatever mechanism you use, I do have kind of a template available. I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's a free download of just a template where you can see kind of the different pieces of the circle, fill in the numbers, and kind of have that visual reminder of where you are and kind of where you stand. But that self-reflection, again, as an opportunity to guide yourself, to give yourself grace and guide yourself to show up in the way that you want to. I mean, we all set these goals for ourselves. We don't want to come to different spaces and give less than our best. But if we're pouring from an empty cup, that's what's going to end up happening. So making sure that we're filling ourselves up in a meaningful way and giving ourselves what we need so that we can show up fully and authentically in the different spaces. So again, if you're interested in the Wheel of Personal Perspective self-assessment, link will be in the show notes, and take a look.